to another installment of the Cab Talks Tourism. I'm James Sismanakis.
I'm Dr. Kyle Height.
We are your co-hosts of a very special show today. And I think I say that every time, but this one is very special because we're live here in Distillery of Modern Art in downtown Chamblee, and we have two great guests in this wonderful facility. So, welcome, Sean. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Sean O'Shea. I'm a CPA in the finance industry, artist blacksmith, and then I'm also was either shanghaied or drawn into the administration of the Atlanta Bourbon and Whiskey Society by all of our fellow members. So we have a Facebook group of about 6,500 folks that discuss nothing but whiskey and bourbon in the Atlanta area.
So you're important to Matt.
Absolutely, that's my audience.
Well, Matt, you are here with this wonderful facility. Just got ranked number 7 by the state of Georgia for a special event facility.
Awesome.
I think that's extremely cool, that being the mixture of what this is, but we'll let you talk about that.
We have a little bit of everything here. As you mentioned, we have an event space. We can handle up to 230 people for all kinds of events, meetings, weddings, other things like that. In addition to that, we are sitting in our cocktail lounge here. So we are open from 5 to about 11 on Thursday through Saturday, and then Sunday afternoons from 11 to 6. Cocktails, we have small bites. We often have pop-ups for different local chefs. We have food trucks come in, and there's usually live music every weekend night as well. So we have that. In addition to the tasting room and event space, we have an art gallery on the other side of this wall, which is an ever-changing kind of art gallery. Every 2 months, there's 2 new local artists that come in. We try and do a lot to support local art. And then we are a full-fledged distillery and production facility. So the most of what we do out of here is distillation and packaging, not just for ourselves, but for other local brands and other national brands as well. So we keep that business going as well.
Well, I know last week we had a huge group here of Convention and Visitor Bureau and attraction people, and had a luncheon and a guest speaker here. The place was packed. It was so nice to have this facility for an event like that.
And we're open for all kinds of things like that. So it's nice to have a nice event facility here in downtown Chamblee, where anyone can come meet. And then in addition to adding a distillery on top of that, just as the cherry on top. So.
Well, Kyle, have you been here before?
This is my first time. Yeah.
Welcome.
So it's perfect. Your first time plus the unveiling of
Yeah,
whiskey.
exactly. It's just so welcoming when you walk in. I'm just really taken aback by it because some distilleries and breweries, they off smells, and it's distillery first and not event space second. But this
Sure.
feels like it's very well taken together.
This was planned as a multi-use, multi-function space in a way that everything kind of is brought into each other. So you can see when you walk around that our production facility is not hidden. Everything is behind glass. It's open for the public to see when they're here. You can smell, you can taste, you can hear, you can see, and it just is an all-encompassing, all sort of senses, all sensory kind of distillery where everything just comes together as well.
Well, Sean, tell us. So you have 6,500 members. You got shanghaied into the group.
Yeah. So basically, it started out with a group of about probably 30 or 40 folks locally that would go to local science fiction and technology conventions and run security. And we finished up at the end of the night. Someone would bring a bottle, and then it started gathering into these more formal events where everyone would bring a bottle that was like an over 21. So you'd have high-end whiskeys, and we get together and we could taste and sample to kind of get a flavor without having to invest in a full bottle that was that expensive. And that kind of became folks then kind of rating and ranking. And then from there, Facebook came about and we started a group, and it kind of kept on growing. It's effectively a private group open to the public, but we kind of limit, admission to folks who are, in the Atlanta area, and we keep the conversation very focused on the actual experience of whiskey. We really don't, endorse, promotions or advertising. We keep no sports, no politics, and there's no trading and selling. So it becomes a very pure experience of folks really celebrating what they like, and honest commentary about where to find bottles for the bourbon hounds that are trying to track things down, and also their experience of what's worth something and what's not, and what they like. So there's a lot of more impromptu gatherings that occur as people kind of post out what happens and what's going on. So an event space like this would be perfect, for folks to be able to just be aware and come out, either just have a a gathering and a tasting, something more of experience like that. But it's a collegial group that we are very heavy moderating to keep things light, so everyone's focused on the one thing, which is bourbon and whiskey.
Have you ever heard of the Eudora Welty mint julep? The writer, Eudora Welty?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because she used to party and live at where my last community was, Columbus, Mississippi, and you had you did the Mississippi University for Women. She went there for a while. She was a huge partier. So we actually, where the Eudora Welty mint julep was in this big, large home in downtown Columbus, and it got coined the Eudora Welty mint julep. But the interesting part about it is, and y'all can tell me what it's missing, it was bourbon, ice, and a mint on top.
That sounds like the perfect mint julep.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's
It's not missing anything.
yeah.
So at the party we had, it was a main female party, but the husbands attended. So we needed something for them, so we brought in the Eudora Welty mint julep. Boy, it went over well. Like missing what, the sweetness or sugar or whatever it
A
was.
little simple, and yeah.
Yeah, it was like, well, it's bourbon on the rocks, but hey.
I've always said the perfect mint julep is when you take the mint and the simple syrup and throw it in the garbage and
Yep.
enjoy the bourbon.
Well, that's
Wave it
basically
in glass.
happened.
Yeah.
That's what mint looks like. Yeah.
I love the fact that you said the 21 and up. So I assume you mean 21 years and up for the whiskey.
Yeah.
And so I love the fact that these groups like this, because it is very expensive, especially these days, to invest in those bottles, or even for wine, like these very, very expensive wines. If you can, stretch it out to where divided up among 8 or 10 people who are paying into that bottle, you can really
Yeah.
taste some really great things, as opposed to just
Yeah.
saving, and then you buy something and you don't want to drink it because
Yeah.
it's so expensive.
And it's also usually kind of the group getting together, and we would basically everyone kind of brings kind of their best their best of what they want folks to sample they really enjoy, and that kind of allows every now and again you get a repeat, but for the most part you tend to get a pretty diverse set of bottles, whatever it is that folks were bringing, and sometimes we do like a bourbon focus, other times it was just kind of everything from bourbon to scotch to whatever. And then one of our guys would always bring like the worst rot gut bourbon, just as like a benchmark, kind of going, it's like, what is Georgia Select? It was like, dangerous.
I can remember a wine that you had me go buy from class.
Yes.
I'll never forget that.
Yes.
It's an interesting thing that you speak of, like bringing the low end bourbons versus the high end bourbons and tasting them off. And one of the things that Seth, our founder, did when he was coming up with the idea of this facility was doing blind tastings with high end bourbons, low end bourbons, high end rye, low end rye, and things, and bringing them out to people and having them just taste through and compare the $30 bottle to the $300 bottle. And what he found is more often than not, the lower end bourbons won in a taste test. And a lot of the stuff for like a price tag and a name on it is just that. It's a price tag and a name. So when we started, Seth and I both agreed that we don't want to have high prices on our spirits. We want all of these bourbons and ryes to be accessible to everyone across the market, because if you're judging by price point, you're not looking at flavor and other things like that. So
Yeah, I think that's really kind of what the conversation in the Facebook, in the Whiskey Society, is really centers around people giving in their honest opinion about really beyond price point. It's like, what do you like? What are the notes? What's good about it? What's bad about it?
Yeah.
And it really kind of eliminates the hunt for the allocation bottle, or the thing beyond a price point, that people can kind of really just get a good feel of what's out there, and they just want to enjoy bourbon.
exactly.
The group of folks that want to a good drinking conversation for the sake of being able to really enjoy both the flavor of the spirits and the conversation, versus something high proof for someone who just wants to get drunk. This is much more about it being able to enjoy a conversation and experience.
For sure.
Yeah. And coming from a wine background, we do blind tastings all the time, and it's often the same thing. The lower end wines oftentimes outperform the higher end wines, because people don't see that label, so they have no expectations.
If you don't see the label, you don't know what the price is.
Yeah.
You have zero expectations, and there's a lot of marketing dollars that go behind big price tags, and if that's the only reason it costs a lot, then drink the good stuff.
I agree. It also makes you a better taster and a better evaluator, because then
Exactly.
you really can see what it is, but beyond the label. And so I think that's great. Yeah, I did that.
So I got a question since you're all in the bourbon and rye. What is the main difference between whiskey and scotch?
All Scotch is whiskey, just like all bourbon is whiskey, but not all bourbon is, or not all whiskey is bourbon, or not all whiskey is Scotch. So Scotch is a domain of origin, means it has to be made in Scotland. It has to be made from 100% malted barley. It has to be twice distilled, and it has to be aged in an oak container for a minimum of 3 years in Scotland. Those are the criteria for Scotch. We don't have aging criteria for bourbon, other than it has to be in a new oak container, and distilled of, or at least made from a mash of 51% corn, rye 51% rye, distilled to no higher than 160 proof, bottled or barreled at no higher than 125 proof, and bottled at no less than 80 proof. So those are really the only legal stipulations with bourbon and rye versus Scotch, but they're all whiskey, which is the great part.
There's a couple dozen. I think like straight bourbon has to be aged for 2 years.
Straight bourbon would have to be aged for 2 years, and of course there's bottled in bond, which was actually the first Consumer Protection Act in this country. Was bottled in bond bourbon, which said that it was made by one distiller in one distillery in one season, aged for 4 years, and bottled at no higher, or bottled at 100 proof. And that was a Consumer Protection Act because people were putting additives and other things into whiskeys to try and make them brown to sell them. And so the federal government got together and said, let's protect bourbon consumers and, come up with this bottled in bond act, which, was great. And now we have consumer protection acts across the board. But to know that the first one was a whiskey act is a good idea.
So you said it's bottled in bond is 1 season, so it's almost like a vintage. Is it season like a year?
It can be less than a year. So
Wow, I didn't know that.
here, bourbon season is going on right now. Actually, we're distilling bourbon, and we're going to do that for 3 months, and then we're going to move on to something else. So that's our season for this year.
Is there variability from season to season? Like
There absolutely can be variability because what you're getting in terms of aging is temperature, humidity, air pressure, all of those things are going to vary year to year. There's going to be some crop variation. There could be a different distiller that year. So there can absolutely be
very
variation.
interesting. I did not know that.
The location makes a huge difference in terms of the impact on how it ages in terms whether it's in Kentucky or here or Florida or Las Vegas. There's distilleries popped up everywhere, and they all tend to get very different character just from the environment.
So that makes it very interesting because, sorry to keep going back to wines, but in wines you might have a great vintage and then bad vintages since you're always trying to find the gems. And so I didn't realize with spirits like this that you also the vintage could have a different variation.
Oh,
flavor
absolutely.
profile.
There's a lot of discussion these days in how actually terroir affects whiskeys.
Wow.
The same corn grown in Missouri versus grown in Texas is going to have two completely different flavors unless a very different distillate.
Interesting.
And you often hear terroir in terms of wine and viniculture, but to bring that into the spirit space, especially in the whiskey space, is really interesting these days.
It is.
Now, I'm sure you all have heard of Jefferson's Ocean.
Yes.
So is that where it's on the ships and all? Is that really a thing?
Well, it's the same
Great
concept
stuff.
in terms of it's putting it in a much different environment than it would on land, in terms of just the experience of the humidity, movement, volume, temperature, all those things.
So it's not just a marketing ploy; it's a real thing.
There is a difference from the way that it's aged.
Besides the marketing thing, it's
Yeah.
different in general too.
And to be able to really compare that, you would have to take 2 barrels of the same batch and put one on a ship and send it all around the world and stick one in a warehouse and taste the difference in 3 years.
The doctor.
Yeah, it's next show.
You have to really science these things.
Yeah.
So do you want to discuss this? Discuss the new.
Well, I mean, first we must taste, right?
That's true.
Not gonna reach all the way over. So this is our initial rye whiskey release. Rye is interesting in that it can age faster than bourbon, and it's not that it's aging faster; it just becomes ready faster. So this is actually, we were looking at our barrels of rye and trying to figure out what we wanted to do with them coming up. They're coming up on 2 years. We had some smaller barrels, which we were thinking that we'd blend into a batch and do an early release. But then we found one barrel from our first year. And we've been distilling 2 years now. Actually, 2 years this month is when we started distilling. And then our rye whiskey, this was actually 2 years, this will be 2 years old next month. So this was 19 months when we put it in a bottle. And we were all very happy with a rye whiskey. So one of the things that we do with rye is all of our products start with the finest raw ingredients. And our rye is a bruisy rye, which was developed in the 1950s to grow well in the Southeast. If you know anything about rye, most of them were grown in the Northeast and in Canada. And still to this day, most rye in Kentucky bourbons and Kentucky rye whiskeys is grown in Canada. But we wanted to do something as local as possible. So we chose a rye that grows well in the Southeast. It's not as spicy as most other ryes, and that's the ferulic acid content in it. And it distills in a more floral note and has some wonderful aroma. So go ahead and taste, smell. One of these things that I enjoy with this one is it's got some nice baking spice notes but the floralness and the other notes that come out of the grains are really nice for a very young whiskey, which is really interesting.
It's nice.
So, not bad for 19 months. So we're pretty happy.
So that's
with
very
that.
respectable for 19 months.
Yeah. So we believe that our raw ingredients, distillation is one of those things that you can't fix it after the fact. You're concentrating flavors. So if you're putting bad ingredients into a mash and it's a bad mash or a bad fermentation, you're concentrating those off flavors. And they're just getting more and more concentrated throughout the process, through distillation, through aging and things. So to start off with the best raw ingredients and the best practices before it even gets to the point of distillation is one of the things we really believe in here at the distillery.
So how do you know when it's ready? Is it taste or is it like chemistry?
It's the hardest part of the job. It's tasting and smelling. Just going into a barrel warehouse and pulling samples and sitting down and just having glasses out and saying, where are we at? What do we like? And what do we want to do with it?
And how long do you want to push that? Because you might run a barrel out 7, 8, 10 years, but it's a long decision to make that point because you got to wait that long to be able to realize from
Yeah, and there's different planning aspects that go into barrel aging. I'm distilling now for 4 years down the road.
Wow.
So I'm making decisions on a daily basis that I'm not going to see until 4 or 5 years from now. But there's the knowledge of science and how things happen in a barrel and how maturation works and the processes that are going on that have me making decisions today on where to put cut points and things, what to put in the barrel, what proof to put it in the barrel at. So I'm making decisions today that you'll discover years from now, which is really interesting and it's really fun for me.
Yeah, unfortunately, since this is such a new enough facility, you're going to have a hard time finding a forgotten barrel early in the stage in your.
There's a couple that I'm intentionally forgetting about.
Got the closet. It's like, what's that? Don't worry about it.
We actually we were transitioning from all our barrel storage here on site last summer to a warehouse just down the road here in Dunwoody, and what we ended up with was a shipping container out back that we had 60 barrels of bourbon in, and it sat out in the Georgia sun all summer long and just really cooked. So there's a couple of those barrels that I'm putting away. We're going to see what happens with those because it's going to be really interesting. And to your point, I mean, the environment that you age in is great impact on all of the aspects of the finished product.
Any guess what that sun and heat's going to do?
It's going to be really interesting because it precipitates many ways. There's all kinds of things that are happening in a barrel. There's addition reactions where the spirit is pulling stuff out of the oak and adding it to the liquid. It's also doing the opposite of these subtraction reactions where it's pulling stuff out of the liquid and absorbing it into the oak. There's all of these other reactions going on where fatty acids and other things are turning into flavors through over time. There's oxidation going on, and all of these processes take time and oxygen and temperature and pressure and all of these things. So all the environmental factors have an impact on what that does. High humidity, high heat is going to evaporate, and you have to remember barrels are porous. They hold liquid, but they evaporate. Air and water are allowed through. So a high humidity, high heat environment like a Georgia summer is going to evaporate alcohol, and the proof is going to go down in the barrel, as opposed to a high humidity or low humidity, high heat of Texas aging, where you're evaporating water out of the barrel and that proof is going up. So there's very interesting things that are happening based on your location. So how it's sat in a shipping container in a Georgia summer under high humidity and high heat is going to be really interesting to see.
You definitely need to hide a couple of those.
Yes, for sure.
The only problem is when you're then, 5 years down the line, you open it and it's like, do it again. Well, it's going to take 5 years.
Right. So we do taste as we go along, and usually every 6 months we're popping something out of a barrel from a season and seeing where it's at, and even more so now as we're coming up on 2 years, we're doing a little more and more tasting every day.
Now, what do you all think about the I guess it's a new craze, at least for me, the bourbon barrel beer?
I encountered it, first from the buddy of mine, Innocent Gun, which I think was probably one of the first ones that did like a cask aged, but it was cask aged out of whiskey casks out in Scotland. Then from there, I started seeing everyone else basically swapping things back and forth between barrels for, beer, scotch, old-fashioned mix. I mean, it's become this whole thing of the barrels being traded around. But in the case of bourbon, you can only use the barrel once for bourbon. You can't reuse it. So then other folks want to use that to finish something else in it. And whether it's beer or another liquor or, scotches that get finished in them,
The majority of our used bourbon barrels go to Scotland from this country.
Oh,
And are aged Scotch, because there's no stipulation that Scotch has to be aged in a new oak container. So they buy our used bourbon containers and age Scotch in them. So technically you can't have good Scotch without good American whiskey, which is great. But we've got barrels that we've given to brewers for imperial stouts, and then we've brought them back and put corn whiskey in. Because we make corn whiskey here where we don't have the stipulation where we have to use a new barrel. So now I've got another flavor option that I can use. I have a corn whiskey right now that has some blends of two old bourbon barrels that held barley wine and imperial stout. And we blended that together into our corn whiskey. And it's really a nice, interesting kind of flavor.
have you thought about being a distiller? Have you thought about using the bourbon barrels to go into beer and do bourbon beer?
Personally, no. I'm going to stick with distilling.
Okay.
We'll let the brewers do their thing, but happy to share barrels with them.
Is there anywhere in the area that does bourbon beer? Bourbon barrel beer?
I'm sure there must. I know.
I mean, there's a lot of craft breweries around here, and wherever
You
the
just don't know of any of them doing that. I'm not that up on the subject.
I mean, the craft ones tend to be smaller batch anyway, so one will kind of pop on and pop off because they did a batch with that, and then they made another one of something else, because they tend to not to be, by nature of craft, they tend to not be high volume in terms of beer set. They tend to be very limited.
I just gave some barrels to Hopsticks up the street here in Chamblee, and he's aging some beer in them. I don't know exactly what he's doing with it, but
I have to talk to Andy.
he's got some rye barrels of ours that he's got some beer in.
Tell us, what was the brainchild of all this operation?
So Seth, our owner, was in an events business. He did a lot of building and designing events, and had a company, and decided to get out of that because he liked spirits but wanted to stay in the event space. So he liked spirits and he liked fine art and modern art. So he combined all of these things and started construction on this right before the pandemic in 2020. So that's took a little longer. But it is the encompassing combined efforts of Seth's love of spirits and events and fine art and modern art that kind of brings this all together. And right back to what we were saying earlier, art and spirits have that kind of coincidental, I guess, sort of cohesiveness where they're subjective. And you may not like a piece of art, but I like it. Or you may not like a bourbon, and I like it. So it makes sense to have those two things in this building and kind of bring spirits and art together because they are one and the same.
Well, I think it's extremely unique to have that.
Yeah. Was it a hunch of his, or was there like a business?
No, this was a business plan that he spent a lot of time working on and had this. So in addition to the distillery, his love of art has brought in local artists. And one of the things that we do here is we are an incubator space for local art. We take no commission for anything that they sell out of the gallery. It is 100% theirs. And if you know things about the local art scene, you can't get into a gallery unless you've been in a gallery. So you get that catch-22. Mm-hmm. And then when you get in there, they're taking, 40, 50, 60% of your sale. So as an emerging local artist, that's a lot of money. So we let them start off here for 2 months. We select 2 complimentary artists. They're here for 2 months. They can sell their paintings. They can come in on Friday. They can host little tours. They can bring people around, show potential clients and customers their artwork, and they keep 100% of the sales. So it gets them moving, and for us, it supports local art and gets people in the door. It gets local artists really moving and into the space and onto their next gallery show and onto their next thing.
Go ahead.
So the reason I was asking is if it was a hunch, because we in the academic world, we're moving into research, and we're finding now that many museums and arts exhibitions really suffered during the pandemic. And so there's 2 things that they're doing. Number one is that they're trying to find additional revenue streams in the site. And so they're retrofitting restaurants, and then they're also having these really high-end wine lists and other spirits lists, because they're finding that what you said, art and the fine dining and this thing to all really go together, and people want that more immersive experience. So they're getting the art and the food, and so it is sort of a night out.
Exactly.
And
And
they're finding
it's interesting because here it was intentional.
Yeah, this is very
It was
interesting.
absolutely intentional to combine all of this
Awesome.
and bring it together.
We're bringing in the arts and the spirits. You want to talk about the artwork in the bottle?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, it's hard to see on the whiskey bottle, but on the back of each one of our labels is a custom piece of artwork. So we have 7 products that we make here: vodka, peach vodka, gin, a peach amaro, corn whiskey, bourbon, and rye. On the back of each label, there is a different piece of original artwork. So when all of the labels were being designed, we gave local artists, here's a glass of bourbon, make a painting. Use this bourbon as your inspiration for a painting. All the original art that's on these labels hangs in this back hallway here. So you can come into the distillery and see the original artwork. So they're on a 4-foot by 4-foot canvas. They were then digitized and scanned, and so rye has its own piece of art, vodka has its own piece of art, bourbon has its own piece of art, and so there is art on the label that was inspired by what's in the bottle, which is a really interesting kind of cohesive unit. And you can come in and drink the spirit and look at those paintings on the wall.
Now, do they have prints done where they can sell prints?
We don't have prints of these,
You buy a bottle.
but you
get
can
it
buy
right
the
there.
bottle. And, yeah, you can get your print that way. For
That's
sure.
pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
So you mentioned you're going to have bourbon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm actually, there's bourbon coming off the still right now. Actually both stills. So we are pot distilling bourbon and column distilling bourbon today. And this is our season for bourbon. So we are on about batch number 45 of the year so far for us. We get about 4 barrels per batch on a daily basis, and we're doing that every day, 5 to 6 days a week right now.
So when do you expect that visitors can come from the show to try out the bourbon?
So our oldest bourbon will be 2 years or ready for a straight bourbon designation in 83 days. Will it be in a bottle by then? I can't tell you that because we're tasting, we're evaluating. We might hit that 2-year mark and say, nope, it's going to be next year. So we're not beholden to a calendar on any of this. And it's all about the flavor and the profile and the taste and standing behind what we put in the bottle. One of the things that some distilleries can do when they start off is source bourbon from other distilleries and put that in a bottle, put their label on it and call it Distillery of Modern Art Bourbon. We're not doing that here. Everything that we put in a bottle will be made here in-house with our name on it. So we're very proud of the fact, and it's a major investment for ownership to do something like that, to not have brown spirits to sell right off the bat. So, which is why we have the other products, the vodka, the peach vodka, the gin, the Amaro, the corn whiskey, which is lightly aged. So it gets us in the market. It gets us in our tasting room having cocktails while we wait for our bourbon and rye to be ready. And again, we're not looking at a calendar. We're tasting and sampling and deciding when it's ready that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty unique in terms of the startup going from ground zero up. I've seen a lot of these other distilleries where they're buying the industrial liquor from Kentucky or wherever else is manufactured, and then putting it in barrels and from there, but to get themselves off the ground before they really start things up. But to take it from zero and count out is quite an effort.
And it's an absolutely viable business model, and I don't ever want to put down anyone who does that. I mean, there's great whiskey out there for sale in bulk that you can put your label on, and call it your own. You just can't say distilled by. It says produced by. Ours will say distilled and bottled by, and so that'll kind of set us apart for a young distillery like that.
So, Monica, in about 3 to 4 months, we need to do a podcast with the new bourbon. So, we talked about the artwork that's unique to here, and there was one of your items that, for our listeners as well as me, it was one of your vodkas. Obviously, not the peach one. I know what that would be, but you had an what's name the different products you sell?
So we have our Atlanta vodka, which is our just standard vodka. That is made from a base of French wheat. We have a peach vodka. We're in Georgia.
Yeah,
Had to do something peach, but we also have an Amaro.
that's it.
Amaro is a traditional Italian liqueur, and it's a bitter liqueur. And traditionally used, you've heard the term aperitif or digestivo, which are things that get digestion moving or get ready for eating. And it's funny, it goes back, there's evolution involved in this. So somewhere in our brain, bitter things are considered poisonous. And that goes back to hunter-gatherer times where you put something in your mouth and you didn't know if it was going to kill you or not. So nature gave us bitterness to say you might not want to eat that. So the Italians figured out that putting bitters in drinks and using bitter components in these sort of alcoholic liqueurs kicked in digestion. And so just in case you ate something poison, your digestion went into overdrive. So they'll have these big, wonderful meals, overly stuff themselves, and have a couple sips of an aperitif or a digestivo, which is a bitter liqueur. Makes you feel better, kicks in digestion.
Is it anything like ouzo? I'm Greek.
It is not. So ouzo is more like a grappa and very licorice flavored. So
Yes. Black
Amaro
licorice.
or Amari across Italy, and it's one of those things where wine, every town has its own. So it's bittering agents, it's floral agents, cinchona bark, burdock root, all these kind of bitter things, along with florals and citrus and things. So think of it as more of a botanical spirit.
Okay.
That's a little bit sweetened and has a little bit bitter agent. Ours is more of a modern New World take on that with some peach in it. Again, back to we're in Georgia. So it is a bitter liqueur that is a little bit sweeter than most Italian versions with a nice little peach kick. It goes great in what we call a black Manhattan. So we can use it instead of vermouth in a Manhattan with bourbon or rye, and it makes a wonderful cocktail. Or you sip it on your own and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think Amaros have seen a resurgence in Atlanta in the past decade or so. You're seeing them on many wine lists and bar lists, especially for Italian restaurants. And Matt's exactly right. You'll be stuffed, and then just have an order of one, and you'll feel immediately better afterwards.
Wow.
And they have like the citrusy ones that kind of taste like artichoke-y, ones that are bitter, some that kind of have a a licorice flavor as well. So there's really the gamut that you can get, but it works.
And it's called what again?
Ours is Amaro Peach.
So what would it be in restaurant you're talking about?
I mean, they have different names, and so like there's one called Amaro Nonino, for example, that's citrus based, and so
But Amaro would be the key.
Amaro is like the general designator of like this is the style.
Okay.
Fernet would also be a
Fernet,
different
yeah.
version of that.
Interesting. I'm gonna go have Italian.
Yeah.
So tell us about the food you can have when you're here.
So we're starting into new things now. So we've got some pop-up chefs coming in. We're doing Sunday brunch, which is absolutely wonderful.
Nice.
So another brunch place in Chambly helps. In the evenings when we don't have a pop-up chef, we do spotted trotter charcuterie boards, all local cheeses that we can get. We've got some great almonds. We've got some great chocolates from, I don't remember who our chocolates are from, but they're local. Excuse me.
Might be the
So
one right down the block. There's a chocolate place. Can't know the name of it either.
someone here knows, and they're not in the room. But yeah, so our small plates menu is just that. It's a small plates menu, but our local chefs that we're partnering with for pop-ups out of our kitchen and food trucks that are coming in, as well as our Sunday brunch, are really picking up. So it's kind of nice, and we like to keep it high end and have a nice meal for you.
Well, the nice thing is you have a full catering kitchen in the back.
We have a full catering kitchen that is a lot of times used for events, and then our visiting chefs can use it as well. So it's great.
We had a wonderful board meeting right here where we're sitting. So I brought the Discovery Cab board here probably last year, but worked out great as a board meeting and had screen and projector and really nice because we didn't go back there because I wanted it in this room.
We're able to reconfigure this space in a multitude of ways, which helps for all kinds of meetings and all kinds of events and things. So it's really not locked into what we have. It's use your imagination and design the space for your event the way you want it.
So you can have a Georgia State Masters event over here.
I think we should. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of
We
fun.
should just combine since they're both the same class for us.
Yeah, I think we
Combine and have a class here.
Yeah, you do like a financial component and then an event space component
Yeah.
or something.
We had very little time to do that. So is there any type of other things you want to talk about? Your favorite moments, your favorite experiences, or your aha moments, or
Well, I think, the aha moment in terms of, I would say, when you get into things like bourbons and whiskeys, is there's a point in I think many folks, either college or early days, or when they move from their mixed drinks and punch and sweet things, and at some point they realize there's a little bit more than just drinking. And then at some point you encounter like, a bourbon or a whiskey or something that actually hits a flavor note and you go, wait, what's that? And then people start going down that rabbit hole. And try to really explore a lot of kind of the flavors and undertones and really appreciating, a liquor for its complexities and ability to kind of, savor and enjoy as opposed to someone trying to just consume. And I think that's where you find that a lot of the market folks who get into, ryes and bourbons and whiskeys and scotches tend to be very much focused on a broader flavor, palate and a slow, enjoyable experience versus just, a rapid, I'm going to say, tailgate type event. So I think that's really kind of the key point. There's kind of an evolution where at some point someone kind of clicks into that, and some of them kind of go, get very intense. And we have, in terms of like the Bourbon Whiskey Society, we have some folks who are like occasional posters and some folks who are rabid posters about, how they feel about it and wanting everyone to know. So but I think really kind of the key element is just kind of an evolution in many folks, drinking the same thing in terms of wine as well, in terms of what folks' experience are, and coming to kind of a point where you realize kind of where you like to play, and then things like Distillery of Modern Art make it a whole lot easier to find stuff locally and have another thing to add to your repertoire of what it is that you like to drink.
Yeah, I think it's good too. Like if you're getting into spirits or wine or beer or anything like that, find those producers who focus on the quality, who are quality first, and that's the foundation as they build up. Because their products are just going to be better in the long run, and you're just going to learn so much more. So when you smell this rye whiskey, for example, there's lots and lots of smells coming out. High-end beers, high-end wines. The better produced they are, the more you get out of it, as opposed to the Beaujolais that I recommended to you many years ago. But it helps to find those. Same thing for restaurants. It's just something I wish everyone would do is just quality first, and then we can really build a distinct brand based off that. And so if you're trying to get into that, if you're new, that's the route I've always taken in order to figure out like who do I want to taste with or what producers do I want to invest my money in.
I'm curious because you know how we just recently had, well, I guess it's been a while, but we just recently had Michelin in.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something like that for the bourbon or distilleries or beer?
There's a multitude of different awards and programs that distilleries and breweries can enter spirits or beers or wines into and receive medals and awards and accolades and other things. I feel like they're oversaturated kind of at the moment, and it's really hard to tell. If you're getting a score of 95 from someone, what does that say?
So nothing at the level of like a Michelin says this.
No, I think it's driven very much by like the folks in our group in terms of they everyone gets word of mouth about what's good and what they like, and based on that is where the demand goes. And so, like I think a lot of these things that over the years have become allocation bottles used to be readily available on the shelf until everyone realized, wow, this is a good price point and it's awesome. And all of a sudden it vaporizes and then it starts getting out doled out, very carefully and respectable. Retailers will sell it at retail on just carefully parsing it out, and other folks will mark it up or run it on secondary and start overpricing it to be able to meet demand. But I think that the rankings on bourbon and whiskeys I think are demand driven as opposed to accolades.
Yeah, and I see a lot of instances where 5,000 people enter a contest and 5,000 medals are awarded.
Yeah.
So, what does that really say? So, the thing that I believe about spirits and wine and beer in general is drink what you enjoy.
Yeah.
And there's no wrong way to drink it. Like if you want to put your bourbon in an iced tea, go ahead. Enjoy it your way and drink what you enjoy and have fun with it and use that to make memories and share with people and do other things. But don't be put off by someone saying that what you like is wrong, because it's not. You enjoy it.
So how would you deal with, like my kids, well, they're young adults and all college, but they if they try my new whiskey or bourbon or scotch, whatever, they go, oh, it tastes like medicine. It does, but how do you get that? How do you explain that to where it's like it does, but it doesn't? It's good. It just got to acquire.
It's kind of an inflection point. So I'll have a case where I occasionally have someone if I'm running a bar, an occasional event that I'll do, and I'll tend to have like an array of like scotches to explain scotch to somebody, and I'll say, all right, look, there's a whole bunch of ranges when you get to scotches in terms of sweet and peaty and smoky and a lot, and it's real easy to dial in by distillery some very distinct profiles. And so you can kind of walk someone down the line of going, okay, let's start with this, and you kind of work yourself up to like the things that astroturf your tongue with the amount of peat and smoke that are on. And you find as they walk down that, one, they realize how much diversity there is in that realm of scotch. And also they're sipping very gently because they're giving them small samples and they're starting to experience. And then at some point they dial in and realize that it's not there. They find something in the range and they're suddenly very surprised that they really like the peaty, smoky thing, or someone else likes something like a Dalwhinnie, which is very light and floral, doesn't have a lot of character to it, or something in the middle that kind of has a little bit robust palate, but isn't like pushing anything out there. And so it really comes down to probably it's giving someone the opportunity to kind of look at it in a focused manner and kind of gently easing into it, because you're not trying to just gulp the thing. It's really you're trying to get this is not a drink you're trying to slam. It's a drink that you're trying to really just kind of flavor and gently enjoy. And that's like the sign of this is a good rye. It slowly evaporates as you're talking.
Yep.
Another thing too is I think you should always calibrate your palates for every time you're tasting something. And so like for younger individuals who I've trained or taught, if they're just taking one sip and that's the first alcohol they've had of the day, their palate is shot. It's kind of like, I don't know, drinking orange juice after brushing your teeth or something. Where it's just this big explosion and it's not really the true essence. And so like when I did my sommelier certifications, I always recommend drinking wine before you take the test, just to calibrate your palate. I know winemakers do that, etc., just so your palate isn't shocked, and so then when you have the subsequent taste, then you're really starting to get more nuances, and it just makes it a little bit less brash, I think, or medicinal sometimes.
I mean, again, another kind of things in terms of tasting is you'll take like the liquor in its raw state, you take that first sip and smell and hit, and then you just add a couple of drops of water just to break it up and loosen it up. And that can make a world of difference in terms of just actually that it actually impacts the surface tension of the liquor and really allows it to kind of open up a little bit. So you're not really watering it down, but you're loosening it up. And that can be a difference to them. The other thing is that in between sips of these things, usually water and like a water cracker or something charcuterie, something to kind of clear your palate and reset so that you're not kind of building on what you're tasting through if you're running on a sample, because otherwise it just kind of all mashes on itself and you really don't get a clear picture of that particular beverage.
Well, I've got it.
And back to your point about younger people and training their palates and other things. I think across the board now, statistics saying younger people, my daughter's 22, are drinking less.
Yeah.
But I really believe it's because they're drinking better, and they're more educated, and they have more access to smaller distilleries and smaller producers and things that are in their local area. So they're drinking better and being more responsible about it because we've all had that education. But so yeah, young people are drinking less, but they're drinking better spirits and they're better off for it.
What I would assume that, like with me, it's not a taboo thing because they've tasted. So it's not like a lot of times I think when you can't drink, you want to go drink.
Sure.
So my kids, they've tasted, and so it's not a big deal. They just going to like I was trying it a year or so ago to get my 21-year-old to go out and have a beer with me. Like, why? Okay, I'm not forcing you to drink.
Yeah.
It's actually good.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I got a thing to close with, but I don't want to get to this. Anything we want to bring up? Because I got a last question for closing for each of us.
Just where can people get your products? Is it just here at the distillery currently?
So-
Is it placement?
All of our stuff is available in retail here at the distillery, and so retail and cocktails here at our tasting room. On our website, you can find a map and address locator of where in stores and in restaurants you can purchase our product here in Georgia. We are distributed through Georgia Crown, and looking to start expansion into some other states this year. So right now, all across Atlanta, you should be able to find our products.
Anything else? Any other closing stories?
Well, it's like this. There's the Atlanta Whiskey and Bourbon Society is on Facebook, and basically, it's we're probably can be publicly found, and you have to basically make an application, and they're going to scrutinize it and look at least to see if you're local, those kind of things, and then as long as you play nice in the sandbox, we won't hit you with the band hammer.
There you go. So closing. There's discussion of, and I'm not going to use the technical terms. You all can correct me as I'm going, but do you want it just splash of water, or do you want it on the rocks, and do you want it a bourbon ball or a bourbon rock, or do you want what's your all's favorite way of drinking rye whiskey?
I drink everything neat, but I think that is a consequence of my profession. My favorite cocktail is and probably will always be a Sazerac, which is rye and absinthe and a little bit of bitters. But most things I drink neat. Even gins and vodkas and things.
I did learn that I had my first gin and tonic water at our event a couple weeks ago. And boy, I've never had gin in my life. And that was pretty darn good. It was refreshing.
There's a good gin out there for everyone. And I always come across people who have had a bad experience with gin.
I had no
And they say,
experience.
I'm not drinking anything that tastes like pine sol. There's so many wonderful craft gins out there now that I can find a gin that everyone will like. It's really fun. Gin's a great space these days.
It is, and it was shocking to me how refreshing it is, especially in the South. And it's simple and good if you have the good quality base ingredients to go in there. For me, I used to drink everything neat when I was working in restaurants. This was probably as a byproduct of my profession because I was professionally drinking every day. As I've sort of drank less as I've gotten older, I typically have either like a tiny splash of water, or I might dig and try and find the tiniest ice cube I
Yes.
can ice band, just because I need to have the water to sort of loosen the tension and to break it up. Yeah. And I used to like those big bourbon ice cubes.
I like that.
But then they started, I don't know how to clean. I don't know. They started smelling like the freezer eventually, and I didn't know how to figure that out. So then I just abandoned all that. And then what got me into bourbon was a Manhattan, and then I drank that for a really long time before I started drinking it neat. So Manhattan's still very close to my heart.
Oh, okay. How are you?
So I would say that my go-to is usually if I'm making a drink with a bourbon, it's usually an old fashioned, and then the second on is Sazerac's kind of the follow on that one. In terms of just drinking bourbons and ryes, it's I say neat, usually splash of water, and then depending on kind of where things are going. If this is going to be a long night, a lot of conversations with a lot of people, I tend to throw some ice on that and kind of let it mellow so that you're kind of sipping a little bit slower over time and just letting it kind of work out. You're still getting the flavors, because if the conversation is going a long time, then you want to slow the evaporation of the bottle between the people. But that's kind of usually the way that it rolls.
Well, I'd say with me, if I'm at home, I tried the bourbon ball at home, and it came. So if I'm in a restaurant and they have the giant rock, square, the cube, or if they have the bourbon ball, then I like it with the bourbon ball or rock, whatever. At home, I just end up drinking it neat. I throw a few little ice cubes. I might just try the water. Don't splash the water big. So it's interesting how everybody has their own style. Like you said, you want to have what you enjoy, and what you enjoy is right. It might not be for somebody else.
Right.
So, well, I want to thank you all for coming to the show. Always a pleasure to have you co-hosting.
Yeah, these are so much fun.
Got to figure out when our next show is.
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you all for being on, and thank you all for tuning in, and be sure to check our next show.